We're real happy to welcome all of you here today. We're getting a little bit of a late start, but that just, I think, intensifies the curiosity and anticipation for a great event for today. And I'll just jump right in. My name is Shirikiana, and I'm co-owner of Sankofa Video and Bookstore. And today we are welcoming two wonderful guests presenting a book called The Golden Apple, Changing the Structure of Civilization Aftermath, Volume 3, published by Red Sea Press. And we are really pushing our online presence. We're hopefully going to have a great deal more of these kinds of events. And we look forward to you purchasing these books online or in the store at sankofa.com online or at our bookstore, 2714 Georgia Avenue, Washington, D.C., 20001. We're open from 10 to 6, 7 days a week, every day. You can come by Sankofa. Because of COVID, we're allowing 4 people in the store about, and people have been very comfortable with that number. And we're hoping that during the holidays, that's a steady stream of people who come in with a mask and are very careful to social distance when they arrive. And of course, our track record for shipping online, I think it's been pretty good considering how we had to do that very quickly with very little notice before the pandemic. And the holidays is going to be even smoother. So we're busily uploading everything that we can to make sure that you have access to the most wonderful material, I think, that the Black world has to offer in the way of intellectual and cultural materials. So let's go ahead and start today's event. Edgar J. Ridley, an expert on symbolic behavior and its impact on culture, studied and did research at the radiocarbon laboratory of IFAN, Institut Fondamental d'Afrique Noire, also known as Cheikh Anta Diop University, formerly University of Dakar, under the renowned nuclear physicist and Egyptologist Cheikh Anta Diop. The research Inc., an international management consulting firm specializing in organizational behavior and productivity. With in New York and worldwide affiliates. Mr. Ridley's research produced a concept he titled the symptomatic thought process, the implementation of which transforms human behavior. And we're also really happy to welcome information and culture. A native of Cincinnati, Ohio, he maintains his professional and social ties to his hometown by serving as a consultant to several grassroots organizations, educators, and his fraternal lodge, St. John's No. 3 PHA. He has most recently been invited to work directly with Taraji P. Henson and her foundation, Boris Lawrence Henson Foundation, during their inaugural conference and benefit banquet. And I would like to make sure that our guests have muted or unmuted their microphones. And I would like to turn it over to the capable hands of Mr. Ridley and Dr. Menzise.
All right, thank you so much, Shirikiana. And a big thank you to Sankofa Videos and Books for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity to be in the presence of such greatness. Just a little bit of background on how I first became aware of Mr. Ridley's work. It's actually Brother E. New Yarbrough. He's actually here in the group right now. We were at a UNIA book fair, and I made a presentation, and I have a book called Symbolically Speaking. I did a lot with symbolism. And he came up to me afterwards and said, "Hey, Doc," he said, you know, you ever heard of a book called An African Answer? I said, "No, I never heard of that, man." He said, well, you know, it's a brother who talks about how symbolism and symbolic thinking is at the core of Africa's problems and the problems in the world. And I said, what you talking about, Willis? I said, no way, come on, man, quit playing. And so that was my first, introduction to Mr. Ridley. So of course, what I did immediately was I went and got the book. And as I'm reading An African Answer, Mr. Ridley mentions his thesis, The Neurological Misadventures of Primordial Man. And so I'm the type of guy that if I'm reading something and another book is referenced or a manuscript is referenced, I'm trying to find it. So of course I did the online search for it, couldn't find it. I said, you know what? Let me Google Mr. Edgar Ridley. So I did that, and I actually found the phone number and I called. And his lovely wife Linda, she answered the phone. I couldn't believe it. And they took very good care of me, and they actually sent me a copy of the thesis. And it sent me down this rabbit hole of just mind-blowing consciousness and perspective expanding knowledge and information and insight. And from there, I went and I ordered his book, Symbolism Revisited. And then from there, I went and ordered his book, The Golden Apple Volume 1. And then from there, I ordered and read The Golden Apple Volume 2. And then Mr. Ridley and Mrs. Ridley, they were so generous enough to send me Volume 3 for tonight's conversation. And that's what we're going to be focusing on this evening. And so, Mr. Ridley, I just want to say to you directly that you are greatly appreciated. And it is an honor of mine to be in your presence and to have been able to speak with you over the past few weeks. I was joking with his wife, just that it was somebody I think we were online with Kayla actually. And I was just saying how we're talking like, we go way back, And of course, Mr. Ridley is my elder, but I feel like, we've known each other for so long just based on our conversations and the ease at which we're exchanging information. So I just want to say I'm honored to be here in your presence, Mr. Ridley, and to facilitate this conversation for those who are here with us tonight.
It's wonderful being here, and I'm very honored to participate in this dialogue, because this is the stuff that will change the world, period. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, sir. And as Rikiana mentioned earlier, Mr. Ridley actually worked directly with Shante Diop. Many call him Diop, Shante Diop. And he's worked with our brilliant ancestor who is almost single-handedly responsible for bringing certain consciousness and awareness about Africans in the Nile Valley to those of us here in the Americas. And, there's not too many people who can say that they've actually worked directly with the late, great Dr. Diop. And so that's just another. And in our conversation, he speaks so openly and frankly about all of the different greats that he has encountered and actually held conversation and even sometimes debates with, over the topic. And so, without any further ado, Mr. Ridley, I'd like for us to jump right in on this conversation. If you don't mind, just kind of bring us up to speed with how you came to deal with symbolic versus symptomatic thinking, and how you got to the point to where you are right now in your understanding.
Well, it wasn't conventional, that's for sure. I always was interested in the problems in the world and civilization. I felt that there was something missing. And I grew up in a neighborhood that in our block, everybody had graduated from college with advanced degrees. We had doctors, lawyers, ministers, dentists, and White House fellows in this block in West Philadelphia, where I grew up. And all of my peers, my brothers and sisters, all went to IBD schools. My extended family, IBD schools, Princeton, University of Pennsylvania. And so, everybody belonged to, like, mostly Jack and Jill. I don't know whether you're familiar with Jack and Jill, but it's a group for middle class, I would say. I wouldn't say exactly bourgeoisie, but middle class community.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, if you were dark, you wasn't invited to be a member. So you can, that was way back, so you can see my age. But I always felt that something was missing in terms of solving a holistic problem that we face in today's civilization. Mm-hmm. And I found that the educational institutions. I'm going to start there because I have a thing about the educational institutions.
Okay.
They weren't providing the answer that Black people or white people really needed to be human. And I found that, so I went a different route. I went a totally different route. I decided that I will try to travel as much as I could and pick out my professors. I decided that I was really bored in school. They weren't giving me what I want. They wasn't answering my questions. So I would say that I was very, very lucky and fortunate in terms of my education. And of course, traveling to Senegal, West Africa, and to be honest, the only reason I went to Africa to study under Cheikh Anta Diop. He was a nuclear physicist, Egyptologist, a social, physical, cultural anthropologist. So I was very fortunate enough. And I presented him with my thesis called The Neurological Misadventure of Primordial Man. So what I like to say is this, is that most of what the mainline institutions, especially the Ivy League schools, their curriculum is totally wrong. Their basic foundation is wrong.
Okay.
And that has contributed to the barbaric nature of humanity. And my background is unique, and I guess a part of it is luck. When I got out of high school, I joined the United States Marine Corps, and I ran track, and I was Wilt Chamberlain, the greatest basketball player in the world, was in the same high school that I graduated from, Overbrook High School. And I was really inquisitive. I wanted to solve problems. I saw the general situation, but my main aim was to solve the problem. People can analyze the global situation, but in terms of a solution, that was missing. And I think that's why I went into consulting. It's because consultants are supposed to solve problems. And also, I found that the major consultant firms, all white, they were in Africa, they were in Europe, they were in Asia, consulting with their governmental leaders to how to solve the problems in the world that they want to have dominant people over the world, period. So what I did was I went to the libraries in the world and studied as much as I could. I really wanted to do that. I read the literature of the world. I was able to be very fortunate in terms of reading the literature, and I wanted to do research to find out really what was going on. And I had a real problem with racism. I thought that it's insane to judge people by their color. And that was rampant. Being in the military, I was often called the N-word. And being in the United States Marine Corps, I was often called the N-word. And I was 18 then. And then going forward to 2011, I found myself in Kazakhstan, so it was formerly Soviet Union, consulting. And I was there, I was greeted with people who never saw a Black person in their life.
In 2011.
And also, not only that, you had to have a bodyguard. There's no doubt about that. So my wife and I, we had a bodyguard and a guide. And I was really fortunate enough to do research in Kazakhstan, spent over 20 years in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia. And also, I was fortunate enough to join a think tank, a European think tank, that was really sponsored by the World Council of Churches. Mm-hmm. So that was very interesting in terms of learning a bit of European theology, the structure of the European church, and how they went into Africa, and how they really, by using symbol systems, control the minds of not only Black people, but people of the world.
So, Mr. Ridley,
So
real quick.
I was very fortunate. And one thing I like to say is that what I did, I think you can repeat. What do I mean by that? I mean, after I left the think tank, I joined Temple University Community Mental Health Center as senior psychotherapist. And I did that. And I didn't have a degree, but when I was with the European think tank, and I'm saying this because I really have a feeling about what the educational system has done to the minds of people in the world. So when we're seeing what happened with, when we're seeing what's going on with Trump and the existential absurdity of it all that has caused people, to die, I find it really puzzling why we feel as though it's the norm. So our worst nightmare has happened in that the mythologies and the superstitions that has plagued people in the Middle Ages and ancient civilizations is with us today. Mm-hmm. In other words, behavior hasn't changed from antiquity in today's world. It hasn't changed. And so what that means is that we're living in a world that insanity has become the norm. And I'm going real quick because there's so much information to cover.
Yeah, I would like for us, if I can, just kind of jump in and to kind of steer us towards, I guess, the subject matter and the content matter of the Golden Apple, Volume 3, if you don't mind. Because I hear you touching on some of the points that's actually in that volume. And I would like for us to maybe touch on some of those points in a more structured manner so that we can make sure that people walk away with, it's full of gems and it's full of nuggets. And I would love for people to be able to walk away with those that I have been able to mine from the text, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, you're speaking about insanity being the norm, becoming the norm. And throughout the Golden Apple series, and even from your very first book, The Neurological Misadventures of Primordial Man, you speak about how this symbolic mode of thinking and behaving, as opposed to the symptomatic thinking and behaving, has created what you call this insanity. So if you can, just at the outset for us, as concisely as possible, tell us what you mean by symbolic thinking and behaving as compared to symptomatic thinking and behaving.
Great. There's a field now that is relatively new called cognitive semiotics. Mm-hmm. Cognitive semiotics. It's a new field. It was created in Europe. Case Western Reserve University is the best university in the United States who teaches that. And cognitive semiotics is basically the study of symbol systems and its effect on the processes of the brain. That's what it's about.
Okay.
And one thing we have to understand is that the basis of what we think, the narratives that we use, are basically wrong because of racism and what is taught in these schools. Now, I want to say this. People had a kind of a wrong, well, they don't have a full understanding of symbols and what they do and the importance of, in terms of humanity. there's a lot of literature out here explaining symbols and what they do. John Dewey, who was European, the father of really critical thinking, professor at the University of Chicago, he was a professor at the University of Chicago, said this, and I want to repeat in terms of what he said because it's so important. John Dewey said that a solution was found when symbols came into existence, that the invention of symbols is doubtless by far the greatest single event in the history of man. Without them, no intellectual advance is possible. With them, there's no limit set to intellectual development. Symbols is so, the scholars will tell you, symbols are so in tune with Homo sapiens that Terence Deacon, one of the top brain researchers, had renamed Homo sapiens as Homo symbolicus. And I went to Africa to study. And my thesis, what I have found in reading literature and experience is that Africans, humanity was basically symptomatic in their thinking and behaving, in their behavior. And
what does that mean?
I mean, humanity symptoms is innate to the neurological processes of the brain. And let me repeat, this is very important. Symptoms are innate to the neurological processes, okay? So symbolic thinking and behavior is a learned procedure. I think at Yale Development Center, children begin to think symbolically at the ages of 8 and 9 months. I call that a neurological misadventure, because out of that symbolic thought, from that, remember, we're coming from a symptomatic existence and thought process to a symbolic thought process. And the standard academic understanding of the beginning of symbolic thought is when people are in their environment that they don't quite understand what's going on around them. So because they don't understand that, they begin to mythologize their environment. So you have to understand is that humanity, the moment humanity began to think and behave symbolically, I call that a neurological misadventure.
So, Mr. Ridley.
Because out of that symbolic behavior, you have racism, superstition, rituals. If simple systems never left Africa, there would be no religion in the world and there would be no racism in the world.
So, Mr. Ridley,
I just want to say this one fact. Thinking symbolically and behaving symbolically is a mental illness. Racism is a mental illness. I want you to understand that. And what I'm saying is really, you read the literature and you understand those kinds of dynamics. And unfortunately, the universities all over the world, they don't teach that. We have a basic misunderstanding of what is needed. Okay, I'm sorry, I just went on. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I need you to, well, I think what would be really helpful for our viewers is for you to concisely tell us what is this symbolic thinking and the symbolic behaviors that are related to it. Because, I mean, you have a very profound thesis, but we don't have the groundwork for understanding it. And I think that should be at the outset of this discussion, is for you to tell us exactly what symbolic thinking is. You've mentioned where it comes from. You said that symbolic thinking and behaving arises when people don't understand something in their environment, and so they begin to mythologize it. And so are you saying that symbolic thinking is the mythologizing of reality?
Absolutely, absolutely. We mythologize. If we don't want to face reality, what do? We mythologize. And if you can turn to number 2. What's that? Michaela, number 2. You have that on the screen. What's this?
She's got it pulled up.
Okay. PowerPoint number 2, if you can do that.
And so while we're waiting on her to do that, okay, here it comes now. Okay, good.
Yeah. I think that's number 3. I wanted number 2.
Go back one. Yeah.
You go back. Oh, yeah, right. This diagram shows that symptoms and symbols are the two issues, the dynamics that produce who we are. We have to, this is a basic foundation of everything. Out of this equation emerges that if we don't understand the dynamics of symptoms and symbols, then we won't understand anything in the world, period. And if you read the literature, if you read the different theoretical systems in a multidisciplinary way in terms of social, physical, cultural anthropology, psychology, all the great thinkers in the world who come up with various ideas. But these two are the main functioning of the brain, symptoms and symbols. Now, if you go to number PowerPoint 3, Michaela, PowerPoint 3. Fine. Okay, going clockwise, you see where it says early man had a was symptomatic in his behavior, and it's innate to the neurological processes. From there, he undertook he experienced a neurological misadventure. Then you have early to modern man adapts symbolic behavior, which produces superstition, mythology, and rituals. And symbolic behavior has caused all the conflicts that we've had in the world. All the conflicts is due to symbolic behavior and symbolic thinking. And that produces a attitude that is incompatible with humanity being decent, caring, and loving. And so when you look at what's going on in Washington and indeed the world, if you look, that is because of symbolic thinking and behavior. And unfortunately, we really got it wrong when we attached symbolic behavior as the norm. We really got that wrong. And
Mr.
you can
Ridley,
see what's happening in the world.
Can you give us examples of what symbolic behavior is?
Symbolic behavior really is mythologizing everything that we do. Mm-hmm. In other words, you mythologize your educational experience. For instance, what does that mean? What does that do? At Harvard University, I'm amazed that a lot of people don't realize what's going on at Harvard University. At Harvard University, David Wright has a lab studying ancient DNA. Harvard is working along with the Max Planck Institute in Germany. It's an institute of anthropology and scientific work. And then in America, you have MIT, you have University of Penn, schools like that, Princeton, you have schools like that. What do they do? What are they studying? We have to understand this. White people cannot tolerate the scientific fact that African people were the first Homo sapiens, and they were Black. And this is a fundamental issue. Traditionally, anthropology, the genome, the DNA has proven that fact. But when you look at the global situation and the institutions, because remember, the institutions are teaching everybody. I mean, when you wonder why we behave the way we behave, look at the institutions and what they do. And our minds have been enslaved by mythology, especially anthropology, theology, and some of the other sciences. So what happens is that Africa, the richest continent in the world, is not enough. And this is very important. It's not enough that we're being robbed of all our natural resources, but we're being robbed of our identity. Now, what does that mean? It means that David Wright and his cohorts, Sarah Tiskoff at the University of Pennsylvania, they all, especially Sarah Tiskoff, she went into Africa and did this genome research, DNA research, the genes. And she came to the conclusion with Wright, there's no such thing as an African people because of genetic diversity. There's no such thing as an African people. And she said that because they want to rob Africa of their identity. David Wright, the new area, the so-called new area of ancient DNA, all that is involved. It's a reinterpretation of the genes, the genome. It's a reinterpretation of scientific facts. And this is through mythologizing scientific fact. This has been going on for I don't know how long. And someone has to speak up, because I was fortunate enough, for instance, we are a mythological population. And I have to say this, when I try to tell Black people that we are led to think. And I have to say this because this is in terms of education. We think that going to a Harvard, Yale, and Princeton and getting that white stamp of approval does it. As long as we feel as though that we need that white stamp of approval, they will always think that you are inferior. You will always go around thinking that we have to reach this magical point that if we're condoned by the white population, the white educational institutions, then we have made it.
Right.
And that is part of our enslavement. Right. That is part of the petty. I've been fortunate enough to study under Paula Fury, Ivan Illich. Those two are the two greatest names in the educational field. Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paula Fury, Ivan Illich. These people are well known. With my wife, who's working on her doctorate degree, by the way, her thesis is my concept, the symptomatic thought process, the neurological misadventure primordial man. I have to say this, that when she mentioned Ivan Illich and Paula Fury on this doctoral program, the professors didn't even want to teach that. They want to tell you what they feel that you should know to continue to control your mind.
Right, Mr. Ridley, let me jump in here because I want to transition us into the specific discussion on the Golden Apple Volume 3. Now, you have as a subtitle of their book, Aftermath. Why did you name it Aftermath?
Okay, Okay. Of all the scholars that I have read, of all the philosophers, all the literature, I found one that was very interesting. And by the way, he was introduced, I found out about him through Dr. Ben. Everybody knows who Dr. Ben is. Dr. Ben Yosef Ben Yakinen, the Egyptologist out of Harlem, New York, the late Dr. Ben. I read James George Fraser, Golden Bough, his 13 volumes. James Fraser was a professor at Cambridge University. He was a social anthropologist. He was known for, in his 13 volumes, explaining how mythology, by way of symbol systems, engineered the behavior of humanity from Africa all the way to the modern day, through magical thinking, through superstition, and through mythology. It's a well-known book. Everybody has read it, and everybody knows about James Fraser and the Golden Bough because he covers everything, especially comparative religion. Now, why is this so important? Because behavior is the engine that runs everything. You can't do anything without understanding behavior and why people do what they do. That's a basic understanding. And what gets me the most is when I see these pundits on television talking about using words like biracial, using words that words that usually are used in these educational institutions, and they're used out of ignorance. And one thing I'll say about symbol systems and symptoms, usually the standard procedure is this. Scholars have understand that, and they repeat this over and over again, is that they usually see symbols and symbol systems over the symptoms that is innate to the process of the brain. For instance, can't think of the scholar who wrote, he's famous for globalization.
Joseph Stiglitz.
Who?
Joseph Stiglitz.
Joseph Stiglitz from Columbia University wrote an article in New York Times saying that if we deal with the symptoms, we'll make matters worse. Because dealing with the symptoms, it's the symptoms and you can't go to the original problem. And he used to be at the World Bank and he won the Nobel Prize. Stiglitz is his name. That is so wrong. But that's the general opinion. Even Barack Obama has said several times. Matter of fact, just recently, Barack Obama said that dealing with the symptoms is not the answer because the symptoms isn't the cause. So that is a standard misunderstanding and misinterpretation that even the scholars has put out here. Because what it is that you cannot solve a problem unless you go through the symptoms. Symptoms did not start out as a medical procedure or practice terminology. Symptoms came about through culture because they're cultural indicators. And symptoms, since symptoms are innate, they affect every academic discipline, they affect every area of people behavior, and of course, they're well known in terms of medicine.
Right. And so with that, the 13th volume of Fraser's work was actually called The Aftermath, right?
Yes, and that's absolutely. And the 13th volume, to show you, Fraser deals with Africa throughout his volumes, but the 13th volume, he really goes strong in with Africa.
Right.
And I noticed all the scholars, especially from Oxford and Cambridge and other places, Johns Hopkins, other places, they don't they don't mention the 13th volume. They always mention volume 12. I mean, 1 through 12. So one of the foremost scholars, Fraser and scholars who happened to be at Oxford and also I think he was at Cambridge, I asked him, how come you scholars don't mention volume 13? And he says, well, we don't mention volume 13 because Fraser was old, right, and he was blind, and he was ready to die, so he wasn't right in his mind.
They try to discredit him in that particular volume. They try to
discredit him. This is what they do. They try to discredit you, even their own.
Yes.
So I said that is really, and there's some other stuff that I can't mention. He mentioned some other stuff, and the truth of it is, and this is hard to take, and it's really hard to take for Black people, and you know how white people feel about it. We've got to re-educate yourself. We've got to re-educate ourselves so we know we have to be multidisciplinary in our education.
Right.
And I have to say it this way because of our thinking processes. I was in a seminary. It was part of Temple University's graduate school. That was created by Black ministers, called the Institute for Black Ministry, out of the Commonwealth School of Theology at Temple University. I was a part of that. But when I got my job at Temple, I quit. My wife, she didn't go to undergrad. She just went and got her MBA, and now she's getting her doctorate. You don't have to do that. I taught her undergrad and everything like that. And then she had the GMAT. She crashed, and then she's working on a doctorate. The point being is that I teach MDs and PhDs. They know nothing because they've been miseducated. Just like in medical school, they teach you that it's a narrow educational pedagogical experience. Like being a lawyer, it's the same thing. We're not multidisciplinary.
They establish the boundaries. They establish the boundaries of the paradigm, and they hold to it very firmly to make sure that you don't get a chance to expand your thinking and understanding of concepts to keep you locked into a limited functionality.
That's right. And it's unfortunate, but I plead to Black people, study as much as you can, and your education is, you have to take advantage of your education. Right. Don't leave it to this white man. Don't leave it to these educational institutions, because they won't teach you what you need to learn.
Right.
I had options. I could have done anything I wanted to do, but I wanted to solve problems, and the problems need to be solved.
Right. You said in the introduction.
The biggest thing for me is to see that we are functioning in a civilization that is sick. We have normalized the normalization of insanity, and beginning with racism and carrying on. Right. And what I do understand is this: your life will be threatened. I didn't think that, and when you think about it, but when you really endure or understand what's happening in the world, when you come up with projects that would change the paradigm and realize that white people are the minority, and realize that people of color, there's only one human race, and that is the populations came out of Africa. It's not race, is plural, it's singular. And I see that all the time. It bugs the hell out of me when I see people say, Kamala Harris is multiracial. There's no such word as multiracial.
Well, it's definitely.
As a matter of fact, I tell you this, and I get pissed about this. The head of the NIH, Francis Collins, Ph.D., M.D., Obama put him in office. He says, well, there's only one race, it's the human race, but we're not ready to say that. We have to say races. there's a multitude of races, Hispanic, Italian, or whatever. It's racist. European, it's racist. He said, we're not. They want to say that because of their innate feeling that they cannot tolerate what
Right.
African people have achieved, and that we are their mothers and fathers. It may not, you think it's a very fundamental thing, but we're their mothers and fathers.
So,
And
so
that is-
Mr. Ridley,
Yeah.
if you can, I went through and there's a couple of points that I would like for us to try to touch on within volume 3 of the Golden Apple. You make some very profound points in that writing, and I think that it would be very beneficial for our viewers today, to be able to hear some explanation and some expounding on some of these points. Like, for example, on page 2, you make a statement that symbolic behavior is a learned process, and you said that already tonight. You say that it's a mental illness that has led to the most absurd, ridiculous, and hurtful decisions in all of life. And so if you can please for us, explain what you mean by symbolic behavior being a mental illness. If you could just kind of expound on that for us.
Okay, what I have found is this. You look at, I've traveled the world. When you look at Africa, when you look at India, when you look at the caste system that is part of American life, Indian life, and other parts of the world, you can see that that's insane.
What do you
In
mean?
India,
How so?
when you have fathers killing their daughters and sons because they haven't married the right people. When you see this huge method of superstition, when you see the conflicts in the world. I remember we were in the mountains of Kazakhstan, and we was crossing a border, Chinese border. And right after we crossed the border, there was a terrorist attack, and all the border Chinese people were there killed. When it got me, when I was, I'm 81. So when I was in the Marine Corps, they had flamethrowers, and they told us to use flamethrowers. Flamethrowers are gadgets where you burn people alive. And sometimes they terminated that because either if the wind goes the wrong way, you can forget it yourself. And then it's a really humane act. Then you look at Nigeria and the killing of what we do to each other and killing each other. That's tragic. And when you look at the general behavior of populations, you will see that whoever controls the mind which controls the behavior of populations, you will see that it's a war to see who is on top. So what I'm saying is that when you mythologize something, you can't deal with the real facts of a situation. So you mythologize it. White people have mythologized in the whole pedagogical issue. They mythologize Black people as lazy people, as inferior, who can't do this and can't do that, can't learn. We have a huge mythological issue to overcome as Black people. And that's one of the reasons why Black people tend to kill each other rather than place our energies in different places. And it's really something else. And I have to say this, saying this, one thing I have found is that what I can say is this. I've been offered jobs by the top intelligence agencies in the world. Why? Because of my book. I'm registered as a foreign agent because of what we do. And that I can say. other things I can say is my book has been banned at some universities after being involved in the curriculum for over 10 years. What I will say is that my life has not only been threatened, but almost taken. And because ignorance is not bliss, I've been very fortunate and lucky because of my education and what that has taught me. But it's not an ivory tower. It's not an ivory tower, because if you do what you need to do, they will try to get rid of you. In India, for instance, Dr. Abakar, a physician, made it a point to try to rid India of all its superstition. What they did to him, they assassinated him. His son has a foundation. You have groups who are trying to rid the world of these superstitious behavior. And superstition, racism is a superstition. And not only racism is superstition, religion is a superstition. So when you're talking about eradicating symbolic thought, and this is difficult. It is difficult, but all religions are superstitious concepts, all of it. And when I've seen people kill and die over their religion, you know something is missing. So we have to deal with the facts, but the facts are this: people are scared. Come on now, people are scared, and rightly so, because it takes a lot of courage to understand those kinds of dynamics. But mythological thinking, symbolic thinking is a mental illness that is destroying the mind and behavior of humanity, period.
Right on. Okay,
And
let me jump in.
taught that way.
Got you. So for those of you all who are just joining us, we are here speaking with world-renowned consultant, author, philosopher, and deep thinker, none other than Mr. Edgar J. Ridley. We are today discussing his book. It's the third installment of The Golden Apple, Changing the Structure of Civilization Aftermath. This is volume 3. And his main premise is that symbolic thinking and behavior is at the core of all the issues that human beings are facing in the world. And that in order to relieve ourselves of that insanity and of that brutality, we need to shift our thinking and behaving from a symbolic form into a symptomatic form. And Mr. Ridley, you talk about the major theme is this whole notion of symptomatic neurological sampling. And so if you can, tell us what this symptomatic neurological sampling and symptomatic thought process actually is, and how do we shift ourselves from the symbolic, how do we abandon, because you say later in the book that it's for us to abandon the symbolic way of thinking and behaving in order to adopt the symptomatic thinking and behaving. And in that instance, you refer to his church bell experience. You said that he had this church bell experience that had him shift, his understanding of reality. And then if you can, just tell us about that whole symptomatic neurological sampling and the thought process, symptomatic thought process, and that bell experience.
Right. I'm glad you went there. Scholars, especially from Oxford University and especially from Cambridge, Fraser taught at Cambridge University his whole life. Fraser has been criticized early in his work because of his idea and his criticism about religion. There's been top scholars around the world who have tried to interpret the Golden Bough. There's a lot of books written about the interpretation of what Fraser tried to accomplish by his critique of humanity and the symbolic effects of the behavior of humanity. A.B. Cook, one of the top scholars at Cambridge, wrote a review of his book and said that Fraser's work was full of conjecture. And one of the things that Fraser talked about and was Lake Nemi, the goddess Diana. Fraser's whole work was based on that, and from beginning to end, really, was on Africa. And the symbol systems that has its origin in Africa.
Right.
And he's known for his critique of Lake Nemi and goddess Diana, and also the sacrifices of humanity and how people killed each other in the dark ages. And
now Lake Nemi is in France, is that correct?
And over religion and superstition. And he ended by saying that he could hear the church bells from Rome all the way to Lake Nemi. And people, scholars criticized him, saying, well, that's a myth. You can't hear those church bells because it's so far away. And also, he was really known for the mistletoe. We don't have enough time to go into the critique.
But that's actually one of the questions. That's actually one of the questions I have for you is about the mistletoe, the apple.
Right. But what I'm saying is he's famous. He's famous for describing Roman mythology and how mistletoe fits in to Roman mythology. And at the end, he talks about he could hear these church bells coming in from Rome to Lake Nemi.
It's in France.
Criticize him for everything. Oh, you can't do that. It's a myth. But what happened is throughout Fraser's work, that wasn't a conjecture, and that wasn't a myth. Now, I admit, in my volume 2, I felt it was a mythical experience. But after doing further research, and by the time I got to volume 3, I changed my mind on that. It wasn't a mythological.
Meaning that you believe that he actually heard the bells from Rome?
What happened?
And Lake Nemi is in France, right?
Yeah. What happened is that I come up with the term symptomatic neurological sampling. Now, sampling has been going on almost since the beginning of time, but the symptomatic neurological sampling is a new term that I come up with that really transcends anything that those white scholars even thought about.
What is it?
What does that mean? Symptomatic neurological sampling is that you form a narrative. You form a narrative that is absent of any kind of mythological content. So, and also it goes back to the cognitive issues that we have, And what happens is that when you experience symptomatic events in your life, they cannot now be clear about this. But every event in your life is either that you experience is either symptomatic or symbolic, period. You've got to understand that.
So Mr. Ridley, let me jump in. So just real quick. So you were saying that you thought at one point in time that Fraser saying he heard the bell at Lake Nemi, which is in France, correct? No,
I'm sorry. Lake Nemi. I'm sorry. Lake Nemi is in Italy.
It's in Italy. Okay. Hold on. Okay, so it's in Italy. Got you. And I got you. And so what you're saying is that you thought that it was conjecture, but then you did further research and you realized that it was actually symptomatic, but you said it was symptomatic sampling. You said it was a part of the sampling process. So let me ask you this though. So does that mean that he did in fact hear the bells?
He had an experience hearing the bells
prior to, and then he just recalled it when he was there.
But yeah, symptomatic neurological sampling is putting together symptomatic experiences in your life and putting them together to form a narrative.
Okay, so just so we're clear, hold on, give me 1 second, just so that we're clear. So you're saying that when he was at Lake Nemi, that he wasn't literally hearing them at that time, but he had sampled it previously and could actually recall it in that moment.
Yeah, recalling, did you say recalling?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's extremely important. Recalling is like reliving. When you recall something, when you have an experience,
Right. The brain doesn't know the difference.
and that experience that you recall something else, it's like reliving that experience.
Right. The brain doesn't know the difference.
Exactly. That's a symptomatic experience rather than a symbolic experience. One of the things that people do is that they give you narratives like that. Well, they give you narratives that are false. White people have thoroughly given blacks narratives that are false. And we have accepted these false narratives because these narratives are symbolic and mythological and full of superstition and rituals. That's what these narratives are. That's what they do. That's what they do. And one of the things is that one thing about, I tell my wife all the time, and I say, I'm tired of teaching people because the amount of ignorance out here is huge. And it's all because of the failure of these educational institutions who are racist and as the famous scholar said that the miseducation of the Negro.
Carter G. Woodson.
Carter G. Woodson, the miseducation of the Negro. That is the very least. They've enslaved our minds, and that affects our scientific discovery. Let me say this, Jeff. My discovery of the symptomatic thought process and the neurological misadventure is the greatest discovery that's ever been made, and it transcends what John Dewey said in terms of symbolism. And why do I say this? I say this is because of what we face. And listen, I'm human. We're human. What we face in terms of being threatened, life is almost, I'm lucky to be, the doctor told me I was lucky to be alive because what the healthcare system has done to Black people, done to all Black people, it's genocide. What the healthcare system has done to all people, and all this is together. We have to understand these kinds of dynamics. I'm fortunate as hell. I've been lucky. But it's imperative that I give this information out here. And what I'm saying is, I can back it up academically and scientifically.
Right. So let me ask you this. You also talk about you give a lot of attention to magical thinking as well in volume 3. And again, for those who are just joining us, we're speaking with Edgar Ridley, author of several books. Tonight's book, the topic of tonight is his book, The Golden Apple, is volume 3. And y'all can pick it up at Sankofa Books. You go to sankofa.com, or you can visit the store, 2714 Georgia Avenue Northwest. And also, those of you that are listening in tonight, you can begin to formulate your questions. And at 8:25, we'll open it up, and Shrikiana will come on and kind of moderate that part of it for us. But Mr. Ridley, you give a lot of attention to magical thinking as well. And when you speak about magical thinking, it was something that the first time I heard of it was the congressional resolution regarding magic. But specifically, you say that magical thinking is another destructive force, and it is manifested from symbolic thinking. And so when I first read that part, I immediately thought about the movie series Harry Potter, and how, if you notice throughout that movie series, it's all about magic, but there are no Black or African schools of magic featured when they have all the different schools coming from around the world. And not only that, but the movie theme, there's a particular term called Muggle, M-U-G-G-L-E, that translates as a human that does not know magic. And so it's actually made itself into the real lexicon that you can find Muggle in a dictionary now, but as a human being that doesn't know magic. And so with the congressional resolution that gave all these accolades to magic being at the core of art, you talk about how magic can be traced from, what did you say, magic to religion to science. I've often thought that modern chemistry is actually, chemistry is a modern manifestation of magic, is how I've often seen it. But so when you talk about magical thinking, and its danger and detriment to human being and civilization, tell us what you mean by that and why that's such a big deal.
Oh, okay, because is being used quite a bit now. And magical thinking is thinking that you can produce things and things happen that has no rational basis to it, and is fact mythological. Like you can raise your hand and automatically you get all the money that you want. It's a form of thought that is irrational, and it's a superstitious form of thought that has no validity. In my first chapter of the Golden Apple, Volume 3, I talk about how Congress has written resolutions on magical thinking. Now, if you want to know why the government is so messed up and politics is so messed up, because you read the resolutions of magical thinking that is part of the United States Congress. It's sick.
But see, some would argue that
what happens is when you really realize that we live in a sick society that rules out truth. And it's so right now everybody's talking about because we see Donald Trump. But Trump is just the beginning. It was before Trump, it'll be after Trump. And so what we have to be worried about is the masses of people who support Trump, who think that way. It's the masses of people who think magical thinking that you can get stuff for free, and because you're white, that is a magical state of being.
Now,
so you can get everything you want.
Now, some argue that it's actually working quite well for them.
Say that again?
So some would argue that this magical thinking is working quite well for them.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And let me be clear about this. And some of the stuff, I'm very sad about the situation that we live in now. Is that because I think people realize now things that everybody is shocked about the number of votes that Trump received when he is responsible. He's a mass murderer. He has killed so many people. And what gets me is really the so-called white liberal and the people, they're the ones that really, their activity put him in office. So what I'm saying, they're up in arms now, but believe me, racism is going to continue after Trump. It was before Trump, it'll continue after Trump. Trump has brought it out where everybody can see it.
And so, Mr. Ridley, first, let me just say the caveat to what you just said. I don't think we've ever had any president of these here United States that would be classified as anything other than a mass murderer. I mean, with the ongoing wars and things of that nature. But I want to shift off of that. I don't want to spend too much of our time talking about any one character or personality, especially that one. But what I want to ask you, though, is that on page 77, you say that humans should discard symbolic thoughts and symbolic thinking. How do we do that? How do we discard symbolic thinking? Because I would really want us to be brass tacks here and get an understanding, because as you stated earlier, you're saying that you have came up with the most important discovery as far as mankind is concerned. And so I think that we would be unfortunate if we ended this conversation without getting how do we practically apply this, and as you say, return from insanity to sanity by shedding symbolic thinking in favor of symptomatic thinking. So how do we shed symbolic thinking as you suggest on page 77?
That's a very, very important question, Dr. Menzise. Very important question. It doesn't take rocket science. What happens is this. Remember what I said is that symbolic thought and behavior are innate to the neurological processes.
Symptomatic.
The minute that you stop thinking mythologically, symptomatic thinking kicks in. And I was, like I said, I've been extremely fortunate enough to be taught by some of the world's greatest scholars. Edward Whitmont, for instance, is an MD from Vienna, University of Vienna, got his MD. He was a founder of the Carl Jung Institute in New York City. what he said, I was talking with him. He had written me a letter, and he was saying that that humans must think not only symptomatically, which is innate, but thinking symbolically. So what people, there's a general opinion from the scholars who understand the dynamics of cognitive semiotics, is that we think symptomatically and symbolically. Thinking symptomatically and symbolically is schizophrenia. What we have to understand is that
so hold on, Mr. Ridley.
The moment we stop thinking mythologically, then we begin to think symptomatically, void of symbolic thinking.
Let me jump in there, because that's a very big statement that you made, and I don't want us to just breeze past it, because I think that it should receive, its just due. So you said that by thinking, and you mentioned this in our conversation the other day, because when I was saying that, why not do both? Because I'm looking at left hemisphere dominance versus right hemisphere dominance, and then a dual hemispheric way of functioning. And so to me, my particular orientation, and I'm open, to shifting and learning more, just like you said, Fraser was loosely holding on to his theory in order that he may grow and develop as he learns more information. But my current disposition is that dual hemisphere is the superior form of functioning, and that is usually an and in both resolution to most problems. And so you're saying that for somebody to adopt symptomatic, or try to, because you said you can't even do it, you said it's impossible to do it, to adopt a symptomatic and symbolic way of thinking, but if you could do it, it would produce insanity. And I mean, not just insanity, no, you said it would produce schizophrenia.
That's what we're doing now.
You said it would produce schizophrenia. So what do you mean that it produces schizophrenia?
In other words, I think we're at a point, and now it's more prevalent now because of what's happening in the world today. What's happening in the world today is really prevalent. People, I mean, it's insane when you see the amount of killings that's happening in the world today, and it's taken for granted. It boggles the mind when you see people killing each other and it's taken for granted. We live in a world that is schizophrenic and insane. So to think that we can think symbolically in conjunction with thinking symptomatically, that causes a process, a mental process that causes confusion, and that is what's going on today in today's world. And so you get people, the suicide rate. You look at the suicide rate. Black people are committing suicide more now than ever before. The general population is committing suicide like never before. So we're living in a civilization that has been problematic from the start, going back to antiquity, when Homo sapiens began to think symbolically and act out symbolically. And that's one of the reasons why the scholars today feel so strongly about symbolism. Symbolism is extremely important because it affects every area of our life, beginning with birth until the end. That's what symbolism does. And that's why John Dewey said it's the greatest discovery in human history. But that greatest discovery in human history has murdered and caused hunger and just caused acts that are really inhuman. So when you experience, and what gets me is I've seen acts that are inhuman that are accepted as the norm, and that's unfortunate because the people who commit these acts affects them mentally also.
And that's what you mean by normalizing insanity when you make that statement.
Exactly. We have normalized insanity. Now, one of the things that Fraser did in volume 13, I really urge everybody to read volume 13 and his foreword. He said this. He said that everything that he said that is theoretical, and if he's proven wrong, he will take back. But the facts is what will be with us forever. We've got to rid humanity of its superstition and its symbolic intent if civilizations are to survive. What Fraser didn't do was come up with the solution. I've come up with the solution. And the reason why I say that is because I'm a Black man who've come up with the solution to solving the problems of the world. I can say that because of the arrogance. If you're a professor, and I've got it with me, people have white people have said, or in the educational institutions where you have Black professors, engineers, have to write books to receive tenure, and the people tell them that, who was your publisher? And they mention their publisher. No, that publisher doesn't meet our standard.
Right.
I don't. A huge amount of so-called professional people have come up to me, doctors. Who's your publisher? Africa World Red Press. Oh, who are they? They not, they cannot conceive of Black publishers, the Black media. They know that's powerful. I did it all the time. And this is what we have to fight against.
So, Mr. Ridley, I started a publishing company with my first book, and I've been slighted and so-called academically and intellectually shamed for it. But when I ask some of the people who are published with the big companies to get an excerpt from one of their books, they've got to get permission from their publishing company. And so we've been thoroughly trained and indoctrinated to value, as you stated earlier, the white methodologies and the white perspectives and even the white worldview. And sometimes I wonder if our understanding of symptomatic and symbolic thinking, as saying that, that our ancestors, by having a symbolic method of thinking, produced superstition and rituals and magical thinking, might in some way be tainted by that same concept. Because in actuality, when Europeans came into the African civilizations and society, like you said, Fraser, he was a European guy. And so it's just like when Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud ventured into Africa to study African spirituality, they could only take away the insights and information that was in their worldview that they could comprehend and understand, which was far from the totality of it. So they went away with fragments, and in their arrogance and authority, quote unquote authority, made definitive statements about the African civilizations that they encountered, which were absolutely wrong, but they could only comprehend so much of it. And so when Fraser says that, for example, he was speaking about a civilization, I read it, you quoted it, it may not have been a Fraser quote, but you quoted somebody as saying that there was an African civilization who said that their priest literally embodied the spirit of the tree, and that they had to kill that priest in order for the spirit of the tree to transition to his successor. And that was the
Right.
European understanding and perspective of the African worldview. And I can't help but to think that their perspective is going to more times than not be limited, which means that everything that they therefore derive from that limited understanding is itself going to be incorrect. And so I maintain, like when I first read An African Answer, and I was driven, I started writing a response, and I literally was writing a response. I still am going to write the response, but it's part of our conversation when I was saying that, that both the unification of symbolic and symptomatic is probably going to be closer to our actual resolution of our problems than going as far as only symptomatic and trying to get rid of the symbolic. In our previous conversation the other day, when you had asked me, well, how can symbolism be used in a beneficial way? And my thing was that if we lose the key for decoding symbolism, then we run the risk of being manipulated by symbolism and mythologizing the symbolism. But if we maintain the key for decoding symbolism, then what we have in our hands is a powerful tool of transmitting great volumes of information very efficiently and very effectively, and under the cloak and seal of the secrecy that then keeps people who don't have the key from interpreting it. And I think that, as you said earlier, I think that's how Europeans are manipulating Africans worldwide, by making us forget and lose sight of the fact that we can interpret symbolism to our benefit. And then they tell us to just listen to our interpretations and don't you worry about it. And they maintain their superiority over us.
Very good. Excellent, Jeff. And the frustration for me is this. When I see a Black woman from South Africa being named Dean of the School of Architecture at City University.
Mm-hmm.
And then her credentials are impeccable.
Right.
In terms of the standard that whites set up. Then she says, I resign because this happened about a month ago. I resigned because I received no support from the faculty or students, and I'm treated so bad that my heart, my health is at stake.
Yeah, stress.
And
yeah.
later on, they have a conference about racism, and nothing happens. To me, that's not only unacceptable, but it should be fought in such a way that it will never happen to another professor again. But it's like sliding under the rug. Nothing's gonna change. And I can understand that because listen, it takes courage, and everybody's human, and they're afraid of their jobs. They're afraid of starving to death. There's so many things they're afraid about. But I tell you now that it's got to stop, and we have to somehow come up with the courage to stand up and fight against this racism. Because what they will tell you, racism will always be with us. Check this out. Racism will always be with us. It will be never eradicated.
Right.
Symbol system will never be eradicated. Check the academic disciplines. Check what they're writing about cognitive semiotics. And it can be very confusing to some people in terms of that discipline, in terms of how it's interpreted.
Right.
But I'm saying right now, at some point, we gotta break this circle. At some point, we gotta break this circle and begin to work together, like you're doing, Jeff, with your associates. We have to realize that it may cost us dearly, but it's better than living the way we're living now. It's better than
That's
living
right.
the way we're living now, which is totally insane.
And if I may interject
I think that's
here,
a perfect segue to
may
go into the
interject here,
Q&A
sorry,
section.
I'm sorry to interrupt here, but just to remind our viewers that we are coming to the finish line of the event. We have about 28 minutes left, and we want to reserve this time to make sure that you have an opportunity to address the issues that have been raised tonight, to articulate your concerns, your questions, your comments, and you can do that by chatting. You can chat everyone. Just list your questions here, and I'll begin to field the questions as they come out. And meanwhile, we'll go ahead and continue our conversation.
Okay, it looks like there may already be a question over there, Sharikiana.
We do have a question about Bitcoins. And the question is from Will Habdi. Any thoughts on the concept of the characteristics of Bitcoin, on how it relates to African value transfers, on how we can use it?
didn't hear the question. I'm sorry. Well,
The question is your thoughts about Bitcoin, and does it have characteristics that may help African value transfers, and how we might be able to use the Bitcoin?
What is it? Bitcoin, it's virtual money.
yeah,
not
yeah.
real money.
You know, there's various ways now in terms of currency, and people, and this is very important because of the value of the stock market, the value of currency, and how to gain capital. What happens is this, is that no matter, the important issue is power. If you have power, then you can decide what currency you want to use. And you can dictate what currency you want to use. So if you have power, then you can, what you can do is you can decide what your currency will be. So I would say that will always be a secondary issue. People are continually coming up with gimmicks about how to use certain kinds of methods that they can use to transfer currency from one place to another place, from one geographical area to another geographical area in terms of the amount and so forth. People at the World Bank and IMF both sit down and try to use currency and methods of currency and to see who can control other people. This is what they do. And that's one of the reasons why Stillis came up with this whole program of globalization. I say that our immediate goal now is to gain power. And the only way you can gain power is to revolutionize your thinking processes. Then you can decide your own currency and the method you want to use to gain what we consider as wealth. But when you look at Africa, the richest continent in the world, that's a paradigm. That's a perfect paradigm. Africa, the richest continent in the world. Do you realize we cannot utilize our own populations to utilize that currency that's in Africa, that wealth, that great wealth in Africa? We can't do that. Our behavioral patterns are such that we have to go outside of Africa and beg for other kinds of currency so we can survive as a people. That's totally unacceptable. That's totally unacceptable. What we have to work on is what I've been talking about this evening, changing our attitude, our mindset. Then we can come up with various gimmicks and methodologies in terms of currency. But right now, forget about it. We have to regain our minds and change our behavioral pattern. One thing about, and Dr. Menzise was very right about that. The African answer grew out of my thesis when I was at Cheikh Anta Diop University that I presented to Dr. Diop. The African answer, and that came out of the Neurological Misadventure Primordial Man. Africa, I've gotten calls all over Africa, especially Nigeria, wanting the African answer because they realize that it's a fundamental issue that they have to change their behavioral patterns. All the oil in Nigeria, all the wealth in Nigeria is not helping Nigerians in their ability to survive in any way without this gross humanity that they display towards each other. So what I'm trying to say is this, our aim now is it's a big one too, changing our attitude, which changes our behavior patterns. And let me say this, white people do not want to see you do that. They don't want to see you do that. When you start to do kinds of concepts that will change your thinking processes, things will begin to change in a lot of ways.
And Mr.
And-
Ridley,
and
you
this is
pointed
exempt.
out, Mr. Ridley, you pointed out how Dr. Diop sought to correct the falsification of history that's perpetuated by whites and projected onto everybody else on the planet. And Amos Wilson sought to correct the falsification of African consciousness. And what I see is your work is kind of like the bridge between the two of them, to where you take the correcting of the historical narrative and context, as well as shifting the consciousness and the thinking process, and bring them together to kind of reorient, not only African people, but, the citizens of planet Earth all together, in order that we may correct our course that will not only save our individual lives, but save the planet itself.
That's true. That's very good. That's true. Diop, he did not stress religion at all. Matter of fact, Diop called God, his definition of God, a so-called God, is a symbol. And I totally 200% agree with that. Diop
Wait a
was
minute,
not,
he said his
Diop
his God was
said
a symbol?
Diop said that God was a symbol. And I totally agree with that. And Diop, what Diop did was huge in his study of, and he's about the falsification of history. No geographical area has been treated like Africa. None at all. And you have to, and it's easy to see why. The wealth, the fact we were the first humans, the fact that we had such great potential. But this mythology, this mythologization, and listen, symbol system started in Africa. And because it was so thought of as a great phenomenon, European scholars didn't even want to admit that it started in Africa. And when they did admit it, they said, okay, it started in Africa, but it didn't become great until it hit Europe in the French cave, and the cave paintings in France.
Right.
In other words, they admit it had its origin in Africa, but it was useless until it hit Europe and became sophisticated cave paintings. And that's why they came up with this Neanderthal population. And that's in 10 years ago, out of Max Planck Institute, they said that the Neanderthal that came out of Africa came out and went and made it with no one except, or made it with everybody except Africans. So what happened is these whites took that and said, oh, we're better than Africans because we're the Neanderthals and we didn't have a relationship with nobody except Africans. So, and we have this thing about we're superior. So that's why you get people like David Wright at Harvard, and also the American Enterprise Institute, where you know about the bell curve. Everybody knows about the bell curve. That talk about the IQ and how Black people are inferior. But even now, Mary, who was part of that bell curve book, has written a new book on biology, taking it from this new understanding of African identity. He has taken a new book and then created other kinds of theories to denigrate African, not only African achievement, but African identity. And that's the thing that is really
biology.
Exactly. And this is a great thing about mythologizing scientific fact. And we have to educate ourselves. Education is so important. And unfortunately, and I have to say that I voted for Obama twice, and I vote for him again. But you can tell what they do to you at Harvard. Obama was weak when it comes down to Black people and what he had to say and do. He was weak. And when Kennedy gave him the dog, and he called himself a mutt after the dog that Kennedy gave him or whatever. He was very weak on race. Very weak on race. So what I'm saying to you is, and it's due to the education that the Western educational model. And it makes me, it's tragic. It's tragic. We have to step up and get an education that's relevant, and we can make great discoveries. I've made a great discovery. And I know it, and I know what I've done. Yeah. And I've had unbelievable jobs.
Mr.
And that, I mean, but what I'm saying is, you got to educate yourself so you can compete globally.
We have a question. In fact, one of our, just to make sure we get some more questions in from our audience, we have a question directly relating to education. Thierry asks, what are some of the tools, resources we can use in the homes to teach young children to shape their thinking processes so they don't have to fall into the general thinking of the world? What are some of the resources we can use to counter the white Eurocentric education our students are receiving in the classroom?
Yeah. One of the things I think that I would say Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I would say Ivan Illich, who wrote the book Deschooling Society, which Ivan Illich, I'm sure you've heard of Ivan Illich. He wrote a book about how education has become like
Cookie cutter assembly line.
Assembly line, a factory like the car, it's like an assembly line. Everybody comes out the same. There's one thing I noticed, that when I talk to scholars and when I read the literature, they write a certain way. They do things and the thing about the way they write, they use it in their everyday relationships and contacts with people of color, and the way they want you to see things. It's so evident. It's so evident. And it's so evident of their lack of education. Their lack of education. So what gets me is when I look at the NIH, for instance, the New York Times had a front page article about the refusal to give Black scholars, researchers, grants at the NIH. They even said Hispanics everybody gets it except Blacks. Now they're saying, well, we're changing that or whatever, we're changing that. This scholar, there's professors out here that are really trying to make a concentrated effort. One scholar at UCLA Berkeley said that she went to the NIH to work, and that the scholars and everything said the right things, but when it comes down to implementation, what they said doesn't matter. They do the same old pedagogical jargon. In other words, they say the right things, but they don't practice the right things. And this is what I see all the time. And they don't, as they say, they don't practice what they preach. They tell you certain things, but they say the opposite.
Maybe you could offer Mr. Ridley some other titles that people ask.
Okay. I will tell. My wife just told me, read my books. Read my books, starting with an African Answer, Symbolism Revisited, and the 3 Golden Apple, Values of the Golden Apple. I'll have to say that no one has, myself, along with my researchers, have come up with a procedure on human behavior that will change the world, period. And the thing, and you can tell it will do that because of the feedback that you get. I've gotten feedback, we've gotten feedback that I can't even talk about. How do we access that?
How do we access that process?
What do you mean, Judge?
So like the answer, you said that that you have a method for for doing just what you're saying, you know, and getting the results. How is it that we, as the everyday person, how can we tap into that, and how can we implement that into our own lives, especially the lives of our children?
Right. That's extremely important. The best that I can do is I'm gathering together scholars to implement the symptomatic thought process all over the world. Now, I've gotten a huge amount of feedback in terms of Africa because of what's happened in Africa. I mean, it's huge. But what happens is that I have to say that, you know, at Morehouse, it was a scholar who doing work in terms of cancer, and she has a problem getting the funds and getting the kinds of access that she needs to. They will try everything to stop you from achieving that. They'll try everything to stop you from achieving that. And you know, I can't stress it enough. I see the fear in people's eyes because they will tell you, I can't do this because it's you know, it's genocide on me and my family. I feel threatened, and I can't, you know, I just can't change that because I want to live. I want to live. They will threaten your life.
And it's really that serious. It's really life or death.
It's that serious. We are in a war. Right now, we are in a war. And one of the biggest problems is that we as an African people have got to begin to support each other, love each other, and fight together. And we're not doing that now. We're not doing, when we don't drive, I use Uber. And I met so many African drivers driving Uber, you know, and it's the same thing over and over and over again, is that there's something missing in our behavior patterns that we can't take advantage of the huge natural resources in Africa. And why we go have to depend on China, we have to go to Europe. Or why can't, you know, we're brilliant people. We're brilliant. But somehow, I mean, I was extremely disappointed when the head of the genome department at NIH accepted an award with Sarah Tiskoff at the University of Pennsylvania. When Sarah Tiskoff is an exact person who said that there's no such thing as an African people because of the diversity. And it's like Nelson Mandela receiving the Philadelphia Award with D. Kirk. I mean, they always gotta dim our process. We still have that mind is that we have to invite this man in, these people classify themselves as white in. Whoever heard of, I mean, did we invite Hitler to come in? Did the Jews invite Hitler to come in and receive the award with them?
You know, I think you're absolutely right.
It's not rational.
That's right. I mean, I think I'd like to interject about at least 3 more questions before we close out. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but some people have been waiting very patiently. Larry wants to know if it's true that symptomatic thinking is clear water. When you add symbols to that clear water, it becomes muddy. The light of wisdom is therefore diminished.
If symptomatic thinking is clear water.
And when you add symbols, water gets more.
Yeah. Symptomatic thinking is a phenomenon that for instance, I was at a medical conference with some of the top medical people around. And they were saying, this guy got up and said that there is some diseases that show no symptoms and void of symptoms. This is in terms of the science of medicine. And this was outside the country. I got up and said that, it was outside the United States. I got up and said that there's no such thing as a disease without symptoms.
Right.
And if you have the disease and there's no symptoms, then you don't have the disease. Now, this is in the field of medicine now. Symptomatic thinking is pure now. I'm saying what, because I have a hard time hearing. Symptomatic thinking is pure and is void of any superstition, mythology, or rituals. It's void of that. Superstition, mythology, and rituals are all created by symbolic thought, period. And that's very important to understand. It's not contaminated with anything else, you know, because it's void of symbols. So when I said that, the lecturer, one of the top scientists, agreed with me and introduced me and my wife as top scholars. And I appreciate what he did. And I'm one, you know, because I contradicted him at a scientific meeting. So what I'm saying to you is this: it's hard. I feel, see, for me, it's hard to take that most of the stuff that we've learned is false, and that it is affect our creativity. That's the main thing. It affects our creativity. And my wife and I have these discussions because I said, oh, well, you're going to get your doctorate. And when she tells me about the textbooks and what they say, I mean, it calls it really bothers me how we are still enslaved mentally. We are enslaved people mentally. When you figure out what's going on in Ethiopia, what's going on in Sudan, what's going on in South Africa. I mean, when you see, I love Africa. I'm an African myself. I love Africa. White people cannot identify me as anything else but an African. They cannot categorize me using their philosophical methods. One of the things that Chancellor Williams, Chancellor Williams, the great scholar from Howard University who wrote The Destruction of Black Civilization, he said something that was very telling. He got his Ph.D. from University of Chicago and went on to Oxford to do postdoctoral work. He said that these white scholars, when they're presented with the exact same information he has, they come up with the complete opposite interpretation and conclusions.
Right.
That is due to symbolic thought. White scholars mythologize scientific facts across academic lines and come up with their interpretation. Chancellor Williams thinks symptomatically, and that is why his conclusions are the opposite of these white scholars. Leo Hansberry, who was a professor at Howard University, everybody knows, the father of African history. When he was at Harvard studying for his doctorate, and George Reisner, you all know who George Reisner is, who was a so-called expert on the Sudan, was a professor. And when Leo Hansberry mentioned that the Egyptians were a black people, a black population, Reisner said, no, you're wrong. And Leo Hansberry said, I'd rather accept the testimony of the people who was there and experienced that than you. Reisner blackballed him all over the world. He tried to get his doctorate. Leo Hansberry tried to get his doctorate in Europe, could never get it, never got his doctorate because he was blackballed. White people will do that to you in various ways. In various ways, they will do that to you. That's what happened to Leo Hansberry. And then we all know the story about what happened in terms of the funding and everything. I'm not going to go into that. But see, This is what they do. They say that they can treat us anyway, and they treat us anyway. They treat us anyway. I mean, and so what I'm saying is this: it takes a certain amount of courage to change that paradigm. And the symptomatic neurological sampling is a new way of creating a narrative that we can use as a vehicle. It's never been done before. Now sampling is old as man himself.
Right.
But I'm saying the neurological, the symptomatic neurological sampling, the way it is done, in a way where we can relive our experiences qualitatively. They talk about Fraser being they talk about Fraser being he's criticized for being an armchair anthropologist because they say he never really visited all of the places that he talked about.
Right, and because he didn't visit it, he couldn't understand it. I remember reading that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what happens is this, another book that is so essential, W.E. Deming, Out of Crisis, is a fantastic book published by MIT. That I don't know what you've heard of Deming before. No. Deming, and I'm happy to say, Deming endorsed my thesis and my book, African Answer, and he endorsed a second edition of an African Answer. Deming was the world's greatest consultant. He was awarded the highest award, I think, by President Bush Sr. He died at 90 years old.
Mr. Ridley, I'm sorry. I have to jump in. I apologize for having to cut you off, but we are approaching the last 2 minutes of tonight's presentation, and I just want to make sure that make sure everybody understands who you are, why we're here tonight, and where they can actually get copies of your book. Okay, if you don't mind. And I want to thank you all for tuning in and hanging with us these past 2 hours. It's been a very enlightening discussion. Mr. Ridley has offered, his invaluable time, insight, and wisdom and experience with us all. This is Mr. Edgar Ridley. He's the author of several books. Tonight's book of topic is The Golden Apple, Volume 3. It's called Aftermath. You can purchase that at sankofa.com from Sankofa Video and Books, which is also located on Georgia Avenue. Let me see if I can scroll this address real quick, Shrikiana. It's there on Georgia Avenue. If you're in the DC area, you know where it is.
2714 Georgia Avenue.
Boom, there it is, 2714
right across
Georgia
from
Avenue.
Howard University.
Directly across from HU. And so, Mr. Ridley, thank you so much. And I really hope to continue this conversation with you because I would love to be one of your symptomatic thought process and sampling ambassadors in the DMV and all the places that I travel so that we can help to get this word and understanding and the practical application to the people that need it the most.
I really want to thank Sankofa for inviting me here. Sankofa has an unbelievable history worldwide and giving African scholars access to share their views and to share fellowship. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ridley, and thank you so much, Jeff. We enjoyed having both of you on tonight, and it was indeed our honor. Sankofa prides itself on being a place where these kind of conversations can take place, and COVID or other kinds of things threatening us have gentrification, all kinds of things out there threatening us. But here we are, thanks to technology and some creativity. We're making sure that we can still keep community and we can still provide a place for thinking and conversing, thinking through and challenging some of the mainline ways of the narratives that are controlling our world. And looking at our own culture, looking at our own resources to make sure that we can create a good future for our children. And I want to thank the audience for joining with us. We want to remind you, as Dr. Jeff Menzise just said, that Golden Apple, Changing the Structure of Civilization Aftermath, Volume 3, published by Red Sea Press, is available at sankofa.com and by coming into our store as well. And I just also want to have a shout out again to Red Sea Press and Kasahun Chekhov for making sure that we have a Black press where these books can be published. Just like Mr. Ridley said, you know, this is us. These are our institutions. And quiet as it might be kept, places like Sankofa rely on our Black publishers. As much as we rely and support our Black authors, we need our Black publishers. So a wonderful, wonderful shout out to Red Sea Press. And along those lines, we're going to be featuring a book by another Black author and Black writer who also has his own company, his own publishing company. I think probably the oldest at this point, still open. The book is called Taught by Women by Haki Marabuti.
Haki.
Someone that we all know and we all want to shout out when we hear his name, because we know Haki has been at the front line of struggle for a long time, probably your whole life, Jeff. He was definitely inspiration to us as well. And the fact that he's a poet, has his own publishing company, has his own independent schools. I mean, the list goes on and on, and he's still with us and doing very well. And we want to be able to put our eyes on him, even if it's virtually, and support what he's doing and thank him again for his work and see what's happening in this new book called Taught by Women.
Wow.
That's going to be December 2nd at 7 p.m. Here virtually where we are now, whatever this is called, that's where we're going to be. And that's December 7th. And I believe that's also at 7 p.m. Another event that we'll be having is Entozaki Shange's posthumously released book called Dance We Do. A Poet Explores Black Dance. And that's December 7th. So keep in touch with us. If you're not on our email list, you can sign up to our email list where we will send out a newsletter letting you know what's going on at Sankofa. It's periodically sent out so we don't, jam up your email. And you can sign up at sankofa.com. So thank you once again. I hope I haven't forgotten anything. I just want to thank you, Jeff, also for your wonderful handling of this program. You were invaluable as well. Your insight into the material, of course, and understanding and appreciating Mr. Ridley was very helpful.
Appreciate the opportunity.
The best of luck with your own work as well. And I'll just do a shout out for Symbolically Thinking.
Thank you. Great job, Jeff. Great job.
Right. Thanks, Mr.
Bye,
Ridley. I look
Dr.
forward to talking to you some more.
Okay. Stay safe and take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank
Peace.
you. Thank you.